Atlanta is one of the top cities in the country, and with good reason. From its colorful and exciting history to its current position as a center of culture and commerce and the home of the 1996 Olympic Summer Games, Atlanta is a wonderful place.
There are many nights in this city where every single shelter bed is full, yet there's still homeless people. Where are they to go? There is no place. They can't go to a park, they can't go to a sidewalk, they can't go under a bridge, they can't go on private property. If they sleep, if they lay their heads down, and they don't have a choice to do that. If they do that, they are breaking the law.
The 1996 Olympic Games to the city of Atlanta.
Well, it's difficult to really start with the Olympics itself because I think they intensified already an existing war against the homeless, and I think a key document there is the 1987-88 Central Area Study put together by Central Atlanta Progress, which sort of outlined a strategy for revitalizing downtown, and a key part of that strategy was the removal of vagrants, as they call it, or the homeless population, from the Central Atlanta area, which encompasses both downtown and midtown. And that they put together a game plan that called for, I guess, what did they refer to it then as, a sort of hospitality zone, a vagrant-free hospitality zone that would be sort of policed to keep the poor and the homeless out and make it, exclusively for tourists and visitors and conventioneers and residents and office workers and anyone but the most disadvantaged of Atlanta's population. People likened the Olympics to a sort of invasion, and it certainly was. I mean, the world came here for a certain amount of time. We spent 6 years, redoing the city, but we don't really have, much to show for it on the social side. I mean, we can point to, a new stadium for the Braves and, some new pedestrian corridors and such, and dorms for Georgia State, but they're really the social legacy in terms of a new mechanism for linking the different segments of Atlanta's fragmented population. That's not there.
The Olympics was sort of a coalescing of oppositional forces against people who are visibly homeless or folks who are homeless being visible. Because there's been some feeling that we've noticed as long as I've done this work for almost 13 years, that people who are homeless or who look poor shouldn't be visible if we want to have a clean, pleasant city that attracts business and tourists. But what we saw was that some of the powerful folks in the downtown community believed that they were sort of on a roll. They began to institute these policies before the Olympics. And when the games were over, the PR started, we've taken back our city, let's keep it.
We sincerely believe that requiring appropriate standards of public behavior has had a very positive effect toward improving the environment of our public spaces and also significantly reducing crime in the downtown area.
The new nuisance ordinances were passed, they're called the quality of life ordinances, after the Olympics.
When the ordinances were being discussed in terms of whether they were going to become law or not, several of the city council persons argued among their own colleagues to not pass such an ordinance.
People cannot live in parks, and the parks remain parks. They're not made for that. There are no living facilities in the parks.
To listen to someone say that God's green earth, which is a park, is not a livable space is unbelievable to me.
The urban camping ordinance is but one of a series of ordinances that have been regrettably labeled quality of life ordinances.
One made it a crime to loiter in a vacant building. One made it a crime to panhandle. And there were ordinances prohibiting remaining in a parking lot or loitering in general. And all those ordinances, and there's about a half a dozen of them, were passed after Atlanta was selected for the Olympic Games with the efforts of Central Atlanta Progress.
Central Atlanta Progress is a nonprofit corporation that represents the roughly 200 largest downtown businesses and property owners in the Central Atlanta area. And the present group exists, basically dates from 1967 when it was incorporated, but in one form or another it dates back to 1941 when it originated as the Central Atlanta Improvement Association, and then in the 50s it became the Central Atlanta Association. But basically this group is of major private sector leaders with a stake, a financial stake in downtown, and they've taken a leading role in planning the future of the central part of the city. CAP wants to make downtown Atlanta a, quote, safe, clean, and user-friendly city, which has led me and a bunch of other people to say essentially what they're doing here is essentially theme parking downtown, like what's taking place in many other American cities, or Disneyfying it, if you want to use a sort of, a sort of catchy phrase. And, developers like James Rouse, who are responsible for Underground, as well as others, adopt this sort of thematic vision, a very clean, ordered, controlled environment that doesn't have homeless, the poor, or whatever, and is oriented towards relatively well-heeled, consumers, and presents a fairly cheery vision of the urban landscape, in contrast to the sort of deterioration and decay and poverty that characterizes, a good chunk of the city. The safe, clean, user-friendly idea is really something that's been taking hold since the mid-1980s, when CAP realized that they had to develop a new plan to deal with the unintended consequences of their earlier plans that basically allowed private capital to do whatever it wanted downtown.
I think Central Atlanta Progress continues to not want homeless people to be in the sight of the downtown community. And the way they do that is they send them off to jail, and they make our jails homeless shelters. Well, I think there's a trend in urban areas across the country to criminalize homelessness. And Atlanta is at the front of that trend. The National Coalition for the Homeless did a study and found that Atlanta had some of what they termed the meanest streets for the homeless of any cities in the country. So Atlanta is supposedly the city too busy to hate has the meanest streets for the homeless population.
Atlanta simply says, if you are homeless, you cannot lie down or sleep in a public space. And it says, if you go on private property, we will arrest you. If you go on public property, we will arrest you. So you have two choices: get out of town or die.
One of the reasons why Central Atlanta is in such a poor state that it is that you had these private developers like Tom Cousins and John Portman building the Omni complex and building Peachtree Center that sucked all the life out of the Five Points area, out of Fairleigh Poplar, took the people off the streets, closed the stores, moved them into these little, enclaved, privileged realms. And then, in the late 1980s, with the development of areas like Midtown and Buckhead and Perimeter and Cumberland Galleria, you had the banks and the insurance companies and the lawyers and the real estate firms and all the service industries that fed off these trades moving out of the center to the periphery or the peripheries. And nowadays, when you take a look at the media and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution and politicians and the like, and they blame the presence of the homeless for the exodus of these corporate tenants, rather than looking at these other, factors that are, perhaps just, certainly more powerful in shaping these migrations outward and creating the sort of landscape we have downtown right now, which is sort of, vacant and emptied and a problem of the first order. Woodruff Park, had been envisioned as a sort of green space downtown for office workers to, eat their lunches and such. And from the outset, office workers had to share that park with a variety of other, urban, users, including the homeless. And as the homeless population increased, their presence in the park increased. After 5 o'clock and during the weekends, the park had become a center for various kinds of, soup kitchens and the provision of services for the homeless by a variety of volunteer groups. Many of the services that were formerly provided there prior to the makeover are no longer provided there. And there have been various efforts to sort of refigure the landscape, take away, benches, make sleep-proof benches, plant sharp, thorny plants under trees where people would sleep, and otherwise make it a less hospitable environment for the homeless, the urban poor, as well as for other marginal groups in the city, as well as enhance policing. And that's where the urban campaigning ordinance and various other laws that have been targeted against the homeless really come into play. It's both manifest in the built environment of the park, but also more powerfully in the legal ordinances that sort of surround the park. The media have not been very balanced about anything, not just about the homeless, but about urban redevelopment in general. They have tended to, focus almost exclusively on articulating the vision of the downtown elite, the public and private sectors, and not really assessing whether or not past plans have actually had the results that they were intended. And they have not really peeked behind the veneer of things to see what's going on. Now, in part also, the AJC, is a major stakeholder in downtown, and certainly has a sort of very vested, interest in seeing downtown improve and attract, high-end boutiques and cafes and, wealthy condos and such. And the presence of a large homeless population sort of militates against that kind of, rebirth for the area.
But what I refuse to accept in my neighborhood is turning over the control of my streets and my parks and my public spaces on a day-to-day basis to the lowest people in our society.
The business improvement district kind of arena in planning circles, downtown business district planning circles, are preaching the gospel of incarceration and oppression in downtown communities, because there's been a growth of homelessness, because poverty is more extreme and people who are poor are more likely to experience homelessness. So problems grown. As problems grown, the fear and the demonizing of it has grown, as if the existence of homeless people impacts the business district, which there is no evidence of. We like to say sort of sarcastically, homelessness is not a blood type. It's an experience that people who are poor have. And more, 22% roughly of the people who are living in poverty experience homelessness. And more often they experience it cyclically, maybe one or more times. But the absence of one or two paychecks could spin lots of us into homelessness. Task Force is the central coordinating agency for services to homeless people, and we operate a 24-hour hotline. And we're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, trying to get homeless people to the services that they need, from housing to employment opportunities to clothing, food, the works. But of the people who call us, 37%, when they call saying, I need a shelter to go to, are working. Now, they usually lose their jobs if they stay homeless, right, because maintaining that is very difficult. The Peachtree Pine building, which has caused an incredible amount of controversy in this city and has demonized me and the task force right thoroughly, has been a boon to us because of the gap in services and because the people are downtown and quite clearly need to be gotten inside or need to be invited inside so that they're not available and vulnerable to arrest. It seems to me a no-brainer that folks would say, great, we've got a building, they can go in, they can get cleaned up, they can take a shower, have a mailbox, have a locker, get information about a job, get a shelter bed or transitional facility, be bused to wherever they need to go. That just seems to me to be an exciting option and opportunity. But the opposition thinks not.
Just as regarding the Peachtree Pine building, there are groups who just have a fundamental disagreement, and I'm one of them, that fundamentally disagrees with the plan for Peachtree Pine. And the things that concern me greatly are the size of the building. Just congregating I've heard different figures, 700 to 900 people in one location is very difficult to manage.
There are lots of folks who believe that we're invading the downtown community. And we say homeless people are already there. What we're doing is opening the doors to make sure they have hospitality, decent work, and a place to live and get clean.
But November 18th, 1996 is also a date that the poor and the homeless citizens of Atlanta will always remember. That was a cold day. It was the winter time. It was around the Thanksgiving holiday. And they passed such an ordinance knowing there was no room in the inn.
I'm very happy with the demonstration that took place on August 28th. Of course, that day was selected because it commemorated the 34th anniversary of Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. And of course, we know that speech talked about how America and all of its resources had a segment of its population on an island of poverty. And we know that speech talks about the fact that every person should be worthy of inherent respect due to the dignity of each human life. We were able to reach out and seize the moment for that spirit of that day to the religious community, which was Concerned Black Clergy, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and other organizations that really wanted to let the homeless community know that there are still people who care.
And that we are organizing and that we are going to send a message in November that no longer can you take us for granted.
We marched from 3 different locations, starting at Dr. King's tomb on Auburn Avenue. We met there that morning and had prayer, and then SCLC marched to City Hall. Concerned Black Clergy marched from Centennial Park, and myself marched with the homeless community from the largest soup kitchen here in Atlanta, St. Luke's, and we all converged upon Woodruff Park and marched in together, by which we had what we call Speak Out for Justice. And what was so beautiful about that was that it was the first time, I think, that for many of the homeless, that they had an opportunity to speak and to be heard and to be listened to and to feel like someone cared.
Well, we were originally involved in opposing the City Council in their efforts to originally pass the urban camping ordinance, and we testified against the ordinance both in committee and before the full council, and attempted to develop some kind of compromise that would address the city's concerns without discriminating against homeless people. And the city declined our offer and passed the ordinance.
The vote is now closed. 10 yeas, 5 nays.
I rise in opposition to the urban camping ordinance. I am legal director of the Georgia ACLU and lead counsel on Richardson versus the City of Atlanta, which is the lawsuit challenging the urban camping ordinance. Well, we filed a lawsuit last month as a class action. We filed it on behalf of all homeless persons, all persons who are now or may be homeless in the City of Atlanta. And we have asked that the law be declared unconstitutional, that it be struck from the books. And we've also asked that in the alternative, the city can only enforce the ordinance if it provides adequate shelter space and transitional housing for homeless people. Because the City Council said time and again that this ordinance, they said, was not directed at homeless people. So we're asking the judge to put them at their word. I have a stack of every citation that's ever been issued for urban camping in my office. And those citations show that almost every person that was arrested for urban camping was homeless. If you go to Piedmont Park on any given day, you'll see hundreds of people laying down, sleeping, and you'll see officers walking right by them. But those people are clearly have a home and have some money. And if a homeless person is doing the exact same conduct, they're going to be taken to jail and sit in jail for a number of days. I think we have a very good case. I mean, this ordinance, these types of ordinances have generally been struck down. A few have been upheld. but Atlanta's ordinance really is directed at the very conduct that makes someone homeless. And Atlanta's lack of shelter space is so profound, and the alternatives are so limited for homeless people that we feel, very positive about the outlook of the case. And obviously, we're hoping that the City Council will see better judgment and look at repealing or revising the ordinance themselves.
The language is absolutely essential to sort of reaffirm and to sort of create greater support for what they are attempting to do downtown.
Quality of life means that to me, we look at the most vulnerable people in our society, in our community, and measure what the quality of their lives is, and we guarantee a standard of living for everybody, which means a right to housing, health care, decent living wage employment, and education, which would mean child care for underage children. So I would think that these would be guarantees in our community.